With portrait pictures, the idea is to have just the subject in focus with everything in front of or behind the subject out of focus. So the way you can do this, the camera gives you a couple options. One is very automated. You can turn the mode dial right here to the SCN mode. Turn that to SCN. This stands for scene, and in here you can choose portrait as your scene profile. Right now my scene profile is set to portrait, but if yours is not, you just use this dial to move that around until you get to the portrait scene profile. Now in the portrait scene profile, my ISO is set to automatic, and I don't have control over my white balance, which can be a problem. Currently my flash is set to automatic, but you can change that if you like. And basically everything is very much automated for me. You can see that also my focusing square is no longer in the center. The focusing is set to face detect. And if the portrait, for example, the person isn't looking straight at the camera will have a very hard time finding a focus point, and it'll just focus at the center. So instead of this, what I prefer doing is turn the mode dial to the AV mode. Here is the AV mode. This stands for aperture value, and this allows me to set the aperture while the camera compensates by setting a proper shutter speed. This also gives me a lot more control over ISO and white balance, which is very, very good. Because I am shooting a portrait, I'm going to assume that there's nothing in front of the subject, as in between the subject and the camera. I'm going to assume that it's just the person and everything else is behind the subject. So I'm going to use the flash in order to brighten up the subject a little bit. And I'll show you how to decrease the power of the flash in case the subject is too close, so you don't overexpose the subject. The ISO is currently set to 80. If you need to change that, you can just change that with the ISO dial right here. 100, 200, anything you like. Now, the ISO is something that I usually set at the very end, and I'll show you why. First, let's go ahead and set up the white balance. The white balance is right over here. Currently, it's set to daylight. And I can set this by either pressing the shortcut button. I previously, in the Getting Started guide, set up my shortcut button to access white balance, so I'll just press that. And using the dial, I can just move this over to the white balance that best suits my needs. If you are indoors, you can use either tungsten or fluorescent. However, I'm assuming we're outdoors, so I'm going to go with regular daylight. Press set to say OK. And so we have the flash set. Again, if your flash is not set up to fire, just go ahead and press the flash button right here and choose, if it's on off, choose on and set that to flash. Go ahead and press set or give it a second to go away. Now the flash is going to fire. My ISO is currently set to 80. My white balance is properly set. And down here, because we are in the AV mode, I have access to my aperture value. So I can use this dial to change this setting to just about anything I want between f8, which will get me everything in focus, great for landscapes, and f2.8, which will be a very, very shallow depth of field. And that may be a little bit too shallow in my case because I want the person's entire head to be in focus and not just the eyes or the nose, for example. I want the ears as well. So I'm going to turn this up a little bit to 3.5, and that'll give me a little bit deeper depth of field for portrait. So now that my flash is set, my white balance is set, and my aperture is set correctly, I want to test and make sure that my ISO is set correctly. So go ahead and press the shutter button halfway. You don't have to worry about focusing. You just want to get the meter to indicate what the shutter speed is going to be. So right now you can see down here my shutter speed is currently set to 1/250th of a second, and that's because I have a whole bunch of light, so I certainly don't need any more than 80. However, in your case, if you are in a low light situation, you may want to consider increasing the ISO if that shutter speed value drops below 1/60th of a second. Below that, and it'll be a little bit more difficult to hand hold, and so you'll need to have the camera be a little bit more sensitive to the ambient light, and increase the shutter speed so you can handhold the shot. So then you would increase the ISO, let's say up to 200. Try that again, press the shutter button halfway. Now I'm at 1/500th of a second. So I know this is great. I'm not going to need to set the ISO any higher than that. Again, in my case, probably lower than that, because 200 will be more grainy than 80. So you want the lowest ISO possible to maintain a better image quality, but to also maintain this shutter value above 1/60th of a second. So I'll move mine back down to 80. And now we're ready to take the picture. So you want to place the focusing square over your subject. Usually I like to focus on the person's eyes, so I'll focus on the eyes, press the shutter button halfway, and now my focusing square has turned green. I just heard a double beep, which indicates that the camera has locked focus, and I can reposition the image, recomposing the image with the shutter button pressed halfway, and when I'm ready, I can just go ahead and press the shutter button the rest of the way to take the picture. Now, once you've taken the picture, and you see that maybe the flash was a little bit too powerful because the subject is sitting a little too close to the camera, you can reduce the power of the flash a little bit so as to not completely wash out the subject. So in order to do that, it's very easy. Press the function button right here, access the function menu, and go down to flash exposure compensation right here, and you can just use your dial to move this little green dash in the minus area. I can't really say where to place it, but you may want to try a couple different settings to see which one works best. If previously you were at 0 and that completely washed out the subject, you can turn it down to -1 1/3, maybe even -2, and see if that helps. And if this is too weak, then you can turn it up a little bit to see if that helps any. Press the set button to OK that setting, and try to take the picture again. To find out much more about digital photography and your digital camera, go to lbguides.com.